My last video was not received well, and that was understandable. I stated a very hot claim, and while I did show my scores and results, I didn't really do a good job at explaining, and I also didn't provide the rotation that I used. So in this video, I did a completely new test, a test that's much fairer than what I showed last video, and I'll also be talking about the best rotation for Makoto Yuki. So actually I'm gonna start out with addressing a comment first. So this is the top comment of the video, and it's a good comment actually. So what they say was, honestly that's a very bad comparison with what it did, and I think that's not how it works when you apply the weakness coefficient and the special effect bonus. So what was he talking about? They were talking about this. So what I did here was I multiplied by 1.2 and then multiplied by 1.3. Okay, the reason I did this was because obviously if that pose for Makoto Yuki, it's obviously going to score more. The first 1.2 here is the weakness multiplier, and that one should be correct. I should be able to do that because when you go to damage formula, weakness coefficient is its own thing. 50% is resistance, 100% is normal, weakness is 120%, and it's multiplicative to everything. So when doing this 1.2 times, it assumes Kasumi hits weakness damage. So this should be correct. And again, everything is multiplicative, so it's the same thing. If you don't believe me, you can actually do the test right now in the game. You go find whatever like fire resisted boss, you hit with Makoto Yuki, then after that, you do another battle, you use Fire Break from Wonder, then you will notice that Makoto Yuki does double damage. Which makes sense. From resistance to normal, 50 to 100, that's 2 times, so it works. So this weakness coefficient should be correct. Now this 1.3 times though is a little bit weird. I might be right and I might be wrong. But according to Lufel.net again, final damage has its own separate category. And according to them, in certain gimmicks and boss battles, there are forms where final damage increase or decrease based on condition. These are calculated separately. So that made me assume that you can just multiply by 1.3 because that is the stage gimmick, right? Stage gimmick. I have no idea if that's actually true. I mean, Lufel.net says that it's true, then it probably is. I did try to test this, but you can't really test this properly, honestly. So this is like a quick test. So the test was basically either I use the other TRG or not. And I got the numbers here. This is not a good test because Makoto Yuki buffs himself after using a TRG. So that will affect the result. So he will obviously do more damage. Now back to the comment. What rotation are you using with Makoto? I guess the best one at the moment is using the capo on him on turn 4, stacking as much buff and debuff as possible on turn 4, and him doing like 6 hits with skill 3. I would say I did not use that rotation for this video. And I also didn't show rotation, so that is actually my bad. I didn't show the rotation because I wanted to save it for a future video because I planned to make a rotation guide for Makoto Yuki. So I was like, okay, if I'm gonna make a video anyways, I'm not gonna show rotation, and that was a mistake. So that is my bad. Yes, I didn't use the turn 4 rotation in the last video. Now I have tested it already. The question now is it actually better? You would be surprised, and actually that's what I'm gonna talk about next, the rotation of Makoto Yuki. You can also treat this video as like a rotation guide. So I've done a lot of tests on rotations, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot. Let me just zoom out for you and scroll. A lot of rotation I've tested for Makoto Yuki. It's just one tab. I have like a few other tabs of rotations, a lot of stuff. So I can tell you which one is actually better. And actually before I even show what the rotation is, let me show you this. I'm just gonna say it now. The turn 4 and turn 6 bursts are pretty much the same. They are so similar that you actually don't know which one is the better one. Look at the differences, very small. Sometimes the turn 4 wins, sometimes turn 6 wins. I don't know. But the rotation that I used for the last video was actually pretty much near optimal. So rotation wasn't actually a problem for that video. But this really only applies to A0 Makoto Yuki because things change when Makoto Yuki becomes A6 or if you're A6 Arch. Let me talk about turn 4 rotation first. The turn 4 burst rotation, the best one I found was this. And for those that don't know what turn 4 rotation means or why does it work, it's this. You use a cadenza TRG here. You have to use it before Makoto's action. You cannot use it here, must be here, so that on Makoto's turn you get a charge. And the first one charges on 2 turns, on 2 actions. So the first one will actually be ready here, and if you use it here, the next time you have it ready is here, assuming no Dakapo. If you have a Dakapo, it actually gives another charge, which is why you can actually TRG here again, because it's 1, 2, 3. That's why you can TRG here again. So the game plan for this is actually to TRG here, Cadenza, which will buff everything here. Then use Tempest Wind Highlight here, which will buff this. Then you do a skill 3, which is good damage. Then you do a Arta TRG to do a bit more damage. And give, more importantly, full moon stack. This one gives you 1, this one gives you another 1. This skill 3 will have 2 full moon stacks. And this skill 3 will do massive damage. can hit like 6.57 million. Huge damage. But there's a problem, two problems with this rotation actually. First problem, you actually only use 3 highlights. Typically 6 turns you use 4, you only use 3. Because the earliest you can use highlights here. If you use highlight here, the next highlight you can use is here. Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Next one will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the temper swing highlight is going to be here. So the first skill 3 won't get the buff. And that's actually worse. You want temper swing highlight to buff both the skill 3. The second thing why this rotation isn't as crazy as people think is because your other skill 3 lacks the damage. The skill 3 here isn't enough to offset the lack of damage for these 2 skill 3s. But again, this is only for A0 Makoto Yuki. If you have A6 Makoto Yuki, that changes things. Because when you use a tier G, you launch both the tier G. So you get 2 full moon stacks here, another 2 here. This skill 3 will have 4 full moon stacks, which is a lot. And that is enough to offset the low damage from these 2 skill 3s. Another one is if you have A6 Anch, because A6 Anch means that you can do another Da Capo here, you can do another Makoto skill 3 here, that will charge the tier G, and you can use another tier G here, which means your this skill 3 will do more damage. So it's very, very specific stuff. And generally, this rotation is the safest to use across all teams and across all awarenesses. What about the turn 6 rotation? The turn 6 rotation is this one. So again, extremely close, both turn 4 and turn 6 for A0, R0, Makoto Yuki. So turn 6 rotation is easier to understand. You just stack everything on the last turn. So temper swing highlight, fire ice highlight, stack on both the skill 3. The final skill 3 will do less in a turn 4 burst. However, the skill 3 here will do more damage because you get the full moon stack for this one. And you'll notice that I also use a Cadenza TRG here, not Arda TRG, because using Cadenza TRG will buff both of this, which is going to be better. I have again tested a lot of it already. I have tested using something like this, TRG, then TRG like this, doesn't work. Use Arda TRG also was worse. So yeah, the best one for turn 6 is going to be maybe this one, most likely. Another thing I want to talk about is Wonders Rotation. Wonders Rotation is interesting because you notice that I use Zao Gongen only once here, the signature skill, instead of 2 times. The reason is because of how the stack buff and debuff works. So how Zao Gongen works is that when you use signature skill, you apply this Ascetic or Deus. This lasts for 3 turns. However, the weird thing is that this debuff thing, critical damage taken, also lasts, I assume, 2 turns. So basically, you can kind of think of it like this. The signature skill applies a buff that applies a debuff. The buff lasts for 3 turns, debuff lasts for 2 turns. So let me explain it using rotation. So if I use a Zao Gongen here, the buff will last until here, but the debuff will last until here. So technically, it lasts for 4 turns. I hope that makes sense. It's really weird, but that's how it works. That's why you can use the Zao Gongen here and you will see that the debuff is still active on the last turn. And that's actually a good thing, because I can do a Zao Gongen here, then a Cohesion here, which will buff a lot of my damage on the final turn. The same thing also for the turn 4 rotation. Actually, I use the Zao Gongen turn 1, then on this turn I still have it. But sadly, I have to use a Rakunda here. I cannot reapply Zao Gongen because I need the defense debuff. That is important. Now, I'll briefly mention it, but the turn 4 rotation is a generally safer rotation to use, because once we get more C support that can charge up DRG, you can use the DRG again here. And like I mentioned just now, with like A6 Anch, using DRG here would most likely be better, because that will buff your skill 3, the last skill 3 you do. So I will just use the turn 4 rotation, make it a habit, I guess, put it in your muscle memory or whatever, but I will test it again when Yukari comes next week actually. So now, let me talk about the new test that I did. This test is going to be much fairer than whatever I did last video, because I tested out all the same boss and also remove as much external factor as possible. So the first thing to ask is, which boss did I test on? I tested this on Vishnu, the Nexus of Dreams Vishnu. I chose Vishnu because it doesn't really have any special effect. Actually, I lied. There is one, which is 20% fire damage, and I'll be ignoring this, so Makoto Yuki is going to do a little bit more damage than Kasumi by default. Other than that, the boss is also weak to fire. And like I already mentioned, we can do some calculation math to remove that and make it neutral. The boss also doesn't have any other special gimmick, doesn't have Soul Link, nothing like that. So this is generally pretty fair to test on. And of course, I targeted all my skills on the same minion. That is not the boss, because the boss has like different defense stat or something. And the team I used is a Medic Twins, Tempest Wind, and Arch. And this time I made sure my Tempest Wind and Cord are the same awareness, which was one of the criticisms I received because my Cord was A2, Tempest Wind was A0, so obviously Cord will do more. that is fair. Be sure that it's the same awareness. The Ange twins also same awareness. I'm using magic twins because we sustain this boss hits really hard. But this should still be a fair fight because everything is the same, except for the DPS of course, and the best support for them. Personas of course are going to be a little bit different because they have different rotations and they need different stuff. And for rotation, this is Makoto's rotation. This is going to be a 6-turn burst rotation because this got me slightly higher, just slightly. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and use a slightly higher rotation. Because I did use the 4-turn rotation and it did get me like 400k less, but I decided to just use the higher number. For Kasumi's rotation, it's going to be this, and this should be more or less pretty optimized rotation as well for both Makoto and Kasumi. Okay, so this is Makoto, this is Kasumi. I show my rotation this time, okay? And the final score for both was this. 53.8 for Makoto, 44.4 Kasumi. I mean, on first glance, Makoto obviously does more, but again, the stage is fire weak. So we actually can do math here and divide this by 1.2 or multiply Kasumi's score by 1.2. But I'm just going to divide Makoto's score by 1.2. So you get 44.8. So I'm not going to comment about this. This is just a score. If you're not satisfied yet, I'm going to do you better because I recorded all their damage for every turn. The DPS does. All of them, all the turns. And this is the final damage that both of them do. Again, we're going to do the same thing. We take this, we divide by 1.2. Get 10.1 and 9.6. Also, like I said, Makoto Yuki is gonna have a little bit of edge here because of 20% fire damage increase. But I will ignore this because I don't know how to calculate into the thing. So this is the difference. So when I say Makoto Yuki is only slightly better than Kasumi, was I right or was I wrong? I'm not gonna answer that, you guys decide. But one important thing to note, again, I need to emphasize, Makoto Yuki's supports aren't out yet. So once they come, he will obviously do more damage. Kasumi's numbers here are pretty much near her ceiling already, near her cap. Makoto's numbers are the lowest so far. It's gonna get better. My point isn't about the future, my point is about now, okay? Because I was curious when I was testing Makoto Yuki, he wasn't doing crazy impressive numbers. That is why I decided to test both of the DPS and make my previous video, which didn't do that well. So I tried to correct it, do a much fairer test. Hopefully the testing here is much appropriate. I also did like a random test, I guess, using my own A0 Tempest Win A2 code. It's just some numbers, I guess. But what you can, I guess, do is you can compare the win, A0 win, A1 win, A2 code, A1 code. You can compare, I guess, you know, if I use A1 win instead of A0 win, it's gonna be how many percent better. And the numbers is like 10 and 5%, which is pretty much what I found in previous updates as well. So it's more or less accurate. And if for some reason you still don't believe me, don't believe my testing, I gave you the rotations already, you can test it yourself. I know the video is going to release a little bit late. Guild Boss is already ending soon. But yeah, or if you have any even better way to test this, feel free to let me know. Because there is still one variable I haven't taken into account, 20% fire damage.